What happens when an empath survives the psychological warfare of a narcissist? According to Carl Jung, the renowned Swiss psychiatrist who revolutionized our understanding of the human psyche, this survival isn't just about escaping. It's about a profound transformation that can unlock extraordinary psychological strength. If you've ever wondered why some women emerge from toxic relationships, not broken, but seemingly more powerful than before, Jung's concepts of the shadow, individuation, and psychological integration hold the keys to understanding this remarkable metamorphosis. Before we dive deep into this fascinating psychological journey, make sure to subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell. We explore the hidden depths of human psychology every week, and you won't want to miss what's coming next. Meet Sarah, a 34-year-old marketing professional who spent 3 years in a relationship with someone who systematically dismantled her self-worth. Like many empaths, Sarah possessed what Jung called feeling function dominance, an extraordinary ability to sense and absorb the emotions of others. This gift, however, became her greatest vulnerability when she encountered Marcus, whose narcissistic patterns created what Jung would recognize as a shadow projection dynamic. Jung believed that narcissists unconsciously project their own shadow, the rejected dark aspects of their personality, onto their partners. For empaths like Sarah, this creates a psychological prison where they begin absorbing and carrying these projected shadows as if they were their own truth. The empath becomes a repository for the narcissist's shame, rage, and self-hatred. But here's where Jung's understanding becomes revolutionary. He argued that confronting and integrating shadow material, even when it's been forced upon us, can lead to what he called individuation, the process of becoming psychologically whole and authentic. During her relationship with Marcus, Sarah found herself questioning her own reality, a phenomenon Jung would recognize as the dissolution of the ego's healthy boundaries. The constant gaslighting, emotional manipulation, and psychological projection created what Jung termed participation mystique, an unconscious identification where Sarah couldn't distinguish between her own emotions and Marcus's projected shadow material. This psychological merging is particularly devastating for empaths because their natural inclination is to heal and understand others' pain. They often mistake the narcissist's projected darkness for something they need to fix or transform through love and understanding. The breaking point came for Sarah when she realized she had lost touch with her own authentic self. Jung described this phenomenon as ego dissolution, a state where the individual's sense of identity becomes so compromised that they exist primarily as a reflection of another person's psychological needs and projections. But Jung also recognized that this dark night of the soul often precedes the most significant psychological breakthroughs. He called this process enantiodromia, the tendency of things to transform into their opposite when taken to extremes. For the empath who has absorbed maximum darkness, this principle suggests an inevitable swing toward extraordinary light and self-awareness. When Sarah finally escaped her toxic relationship, she didn't just return to who she was before. She underwent what Jung termed the transcendent function. This is the psychological mechanism that bridges the conscious and unconscious mind, allowing an individual to integrate opposing forces within themselves and emerge stronger than ever before. Consider what happened to Emma, another empath who survived a similar ordeal. During her 4-year relationship with a covert narcissist named David, Emma absorbed his deep-seated shame about his professional failures. She found herself constantly trying to boost his ego while simultaneously carrying the weight of his projected inadequacy. Jung would explain this as Emma unconsciously taking on David's inferior function, the undeveloped aspects of his personality that he couldn't face in himself. The absorption process isn't just emotional, it's energetic and psychological. Jung understood that empaths possess what modern psychology might call high emotional contagion susceptibility. They literally feel and process others' emotions as if they were their own. When paired with a narcissist who consistently projects their shadow material, the empath becomes what Jung might describe as a psychological container for toxic energies. This containment phase is crucial to understanding the transformation that follows. Jung believed that psychological material, once consciously recognized and integrated, loses its destructive power over us. The empath who has absorbed and survived narcissistic projections has essentially completed shadow work that most people spend years avoiding. The transformation begins with what Jung called the return of the repressed. When Sarah finally broke free from Marcus, she experienced an intense period that Jung would recognize as active imagination, a process where suppressed aspects of the psyche demand conscious recognition and integration. Sarah described feeling like she was carrying a foreign darkness that wasn't hers, yet had somehow become part of her psychological makeup. Jung would explain this as shadow material that had been projected onto her, but now needed to be consciously differentiated and processed. This is where the empath's journey becomes truly extraordinary. According to Jung, most people spend their entire lives avoiding their own shadow material, let alone processing someone else's. But the empath who survives narcissistic abuse has been forced into intimate contact with some of the darkest aspects of human psychology: manipulation, exploitation, emotional sadism, and profound selfishness. The key insight from Jung's work is that this forced confrontation with darkness, while traumatic, creates an opportunity for what he called opus contra naturam, work against nature. The empath learns to consciously separate what belongs to them from what was projected onto them, developing psychological discrimination that most people never achieve. Take Maria's story as another example. After 5 years with a malignant narcissist named Robert, Maria found herself carrying his projected shame about his secret addictions and financial deceptions. During the relationship, she became hypervigilant, constantly scanning for threats and trying to manage his emotional volatility. Jung would recognize this as the development of what he called auxiliary functions, psychological capacities that emerge under extreme pressure. What's remarkable is that these newly developed psychological muscles don't disappear after the relationship ends. Maria discovered she had developed an almost supernatural ability to detect deception and manipulation in others. Her intuition, what Jung called the transcendent function, had been honed through necessity into a powerful tool for navigating complex social dynamics. The empath's journey through narcissistic abuse parallels what Jung described in his analysis of fairy tales and myths: the hero's journey through the underworld, where the protagonist must face darkness to emerge transformed. The difference is that for the empath, this journey wasn't chosen, but forced upon them through another person's psychological projections. Jung's concept of psychological types reveals why empaths are particularly susceptible to narcissistic manipulation, but also why their recovery can be so profound. Empaths typically operate from what Jung called the feeling function. They make decisions based on values, relationships, and emotional harmony. Narcissists, conversely, often operate from a distorted thinking function, combined with what Jung termed inflation, an ego state where they believe they're superior to others. When these two psychological types collide, the empath's natural desire for harmony makes them vulnerable to what Jung called psychic infection, the unconscious absorption of another person's psychological content. However, this same openness that made them vulnerable becomes their greatest strength during recovery. Consider Lisa's transformation after her relationship with narcissist Trevor ended. During their 2-year relationship, Lisa had absorbed Trevor's projected fear of abandonment, which manifested as his controlling and possessive behavior. She found herself becoming increasingly anxious and losing her natural confidence. Jung would explain this as Lisa's psyche attempting to contain and process Trevor's unresolved psychological material. The breakthrough came when Lisa began what Jung called confronting the shadow. But unlike traditional shadow work, where individuals face their own repressed aspects, Lisa had to differentiate between her authentic shadow and the foreign psychological material she had absorbed. This process, which Jung might describe as psychological archaeology, involves carefully excavating layers of projected emotions and beliefs. Jung observed that individuals who successfully navigate this differentiation process often develop what he called psychological sight, and enhanced to perceive the unconscious motivations and hidden dynamics in relationships. Lisa discovered she could now instantly recognize manipulation tactics, emotional manipulation, and inauthentic behavior in others. This isn't just pattern recognition. It's what Jung described as the activation of the transcendent function, where conscious and unconscious knowledge merge to create wisdom that transcends ordinary understanding. The empath who has survived narcissistic projection has essentially been forced to develop psychological capabilities that Jung believed were markers of advanced individuation. The most profound aspect of this transformation is what Jung called the wounded healer archetype. The empath who has absorbed and survived another's darkness doesn't just heal. They develop the capacity to help others navigate similar psychological terrain. Their suffering becomes a source of wisdom and strength that can illuminate the path for others trapped in similar dynamics. Jung's understanding of what he termed the nigredo, the blackening or darkening phase in alchemical transformation, perfectly describes what happens to empaths during narcissistic abuse. This phase represents the dissolution of old psychological structures, which, while terrifying to experience, creates space for entirely new ways of being to emerge. Sarah, Emma, Maria, and Lisa all describe a similar phenomenon. After their relationships ended, they experienced what Jung would recognize as psychological rebirth. But this wasn't a return to their previous state. It was an evolution into something entirely new. Jung called this process the opus magnum, the great work of psychological transformation. The empath who emerges from narcissistic abuse carries what Jung described as integrated shadow knowledge. They've been forced to confront the darkest aspects of human psychology, not their own darkness, but darkness nonetheless. This confrontation, when survived and processed consciously, creates what Jung termed psychological immunity. Jung observed that individuals who have integrated shadow material, even when it was projected onto them, develop an almost mystical ability to perceive truth beneath surface appearances. They can sense incongruence between words and intentions, detect emotional manipulation, and recognize authentic versus performative behavior with uncanny accuracy. This transformation isn't just personal, it's archetypal. Jung believed that individuals who complete this type of psychological journey serve a collective function. They become what he called carriers of consciousness for their communities, able to recognize and name psychological dynamics that others cannot see. The empaths who survive narcissistic abuse often find themselves naturally gravitating toward roles where they can use their hard-won wisdom as therapists, coaches, writers, or simply as friends who can offer genuine insight to others struggling with similar dynamics. Their journey through darkness has equipped them with what Jung called discriminating wisdom, the ability to distinguish between authentic and inauthentic expressions of human nature. Before we continue to our final insights, I want to remind you to subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. These deep dives into Jungian psychology and human transformation are what we're passionate about sharing, and your support helps us continue creating this content. What Jung understood, and what modern psychology is beginning to recognize, is that the individuals who emerge from narcissistic relationships aren't just survivors. They're psychological alchemists who have transformed lead into gold through their willingness to process and integrate shadow material that wasn't originally theirs. The final stage of this transformation aligns with what Jung called the return. the integration of newfound wisdom into everyday life. The empaths who complete this journey don't just heal from their trauma, they transcend it, becoming what Jung termed individuated beings who operate from a place of authentic self-knowledge and psychological sovereignty. Jung's research into what he called the transcendent function reveals that individuals who have been forced to confront and integrate shadow projections often develop capabilities that seem almost supernatural to others. They possess an enhanced intuitive function, can read psychological dynamics with remarkable accuracy, and often display what Jung described as synchronistic awareness, the ability to recognize meaningful coincidences and patterns that guide their path forward. Sarah now works as a consultant, helping companies identify toxic workplace dynamics. Emma has become a relationship coach, specializing in helping people recognize manipulation patterns. Maria started a support group for women recovering from narcissistic abuse. Lisa returned to school to become a therapist, feeling called to use her experience to help others navigate similar psychological territories. Each of these women embodies what Jung called the wounded healer who has integrated the wound. They don't just offer sympathy based on shared experience. They offer genuine wisdom based on successful psychological transformation. Their absorption of narcissistic projections, while traumatic, ultimately served as a form of accelerated individuation that might have taken decades to achieve through conventional means. Jung's final insight about this process is perhaps the most profound. He believed that individuals who survive and integrate projected shadow material serve an evolutionary function for human consciousness. They become living proof that the darkest psychological dynamics can be transformed through conscious awareness and integration. The empath who emerges from narcissistic abuse isn't broken or damaged. She is what Jung would recognize as a fully individuated human being who has achieved psychological wholeness through the integration of opposing forces within her psyche. She has faced the darkness and emerged not just intact, but luminous. This transformation represents what Jung considered the highest achievement of human psychological development: the ability to remain empathetic and open-hearted while maintaining firm psychological boundaries, to love without losing oneself, and to help others while honoring one's own needs and truth. In Jung's understanding, these women haven't just survived. They've evolved into the kind of psychologically mature individuals our world desperately needs.